Hey, how's it going? It's Lee Halliday, and today we are going to learn how to use visx. Visx is from Airbnb, and it's the package and library they use to do a lot of their visualizations. It's pretty low level, but I was able to come up with a pretty cool pie chart that resembles as much as possible this one in the Exodus wallet. So you can hover and it sort of expands that pie segment and it changes the text in the middle to show you, instead of your whole wallet, just the asset that you're highlighting. So that's our goal today, to rebuild this pie chart as close as we can. So let me close this because it seems to just like kill my computer, and we'll get going. So we're working in Next.js. I have this app set up and I'll give you a quick overview of it. Right now it's hard to see, but it says the word pie there. And if we look at the code, this is what we have going so far in our sort of home page. We've imported useState from React. We're going to keep track of when you're hovering over a section of the pie. We've imported pie from visx shape, imported group from visx group, and then some text as well to render some text in the middle of the pie chart. So I've hard-coded some coins that we're going to pretend are inside of my wallet, my pie chart. So we have ADA at 200 of those ADA coins. This is the color, and this is the in USD currency conversion. And then we have Solana and BTC as well. But right now it's just rendering out main. So as I mentioned, the three packages we're going to be using are visx group, shape, and text. They've broken things up into all these tiny little pieces, which makes it really sort of performant because they're very small, but it is a pretty complicated package to use. But then again, I was able to come up with what we're doing in the last couple hours as I was playing around with it. So it's not impossible. You can do it. All right, so inside of main, what we're going to do is basically start off by rendering an SVG. So screwed up already. There we go, SVG. And we're going to give it a width and a height. So they do come with some tools to help you deal with responsive layouts. It basically tells you the width and the height of the container that you're inside or your screen, and as it changes it will re-render and give you the new values. But for us, we're just going to hard code it. So we're going to say our pie chart is 400 in width. So we'll set width is width, and we'll say height is width as well, because we want it to be a square. So inside of this SVG, what we're going to be doing is basically using group. So we'll put group in here, and group, sort of as the name implies, you can group a bunch of shapes together. And we're going to be putting the pie chart in here as well as our text to render out. So what we're going to do is basically give it a top and a left offsite, and what we want that to be is basically half of width. So width divided by 2 is half, so we'll say half here and half. Because SVGs and sort of canvas, a lot of the time they start in the center and then they render sort of out from there. So we want the center to be right in the middle of that 400 by 400 square. So with our group rendering out, the next thing we need to do is start with our pie. So, can't spell, I keep wanting to spell pre, but no, we want pie. And on our pie, we need to give it the data. So the data here is coins, and we'll just do that, and we'll see how it's rendering out. It's not rendering anything yet. So we obviously need to keep going. So the next thing we're going to do is basically pass a prop that will tell the pie chart what value to use as determining how big the piece of the pie should be. So that prop is pie value, and it is going to basically be an arrow function that receives the data. And what we're going to do is return data.amount times data.inUSD. And that will basically multiply 200 and convert our coin into US dollar equivalent. Still not rendering anything out, so we got to keep going. So the next prop we're going to give it is the outer radius. And our outer radius is going to be this half variable that we set up. And we now have a pie. It's a black pie. There's no sort of indication of where one begins and one ends. And it just more looks like a black hole than a pie, but we're making some progress. So now we're going to do the inner radius. And inner radius can also be a number. So we could say like half minus, let's say 8 pixels. So now we got this sort of pie shape defined. Our inner radius is here, just 10 pixels in from the outer radius. There's still no distinction between the shapes of the pie. We're going to get to that in a second. So we can solve that by passing in the pad angle. So this is going to be a really small number, 0.01, and this is just adds padding between each of the shapes. It's a little hard to see, but there's a shape here, here. Why don't we just make this big for a second? So now you can see sort of where one begins and one ends. So I'm going to set this back to 0.1, and it will look better as we add some color to this. So how do you add color? What we're going to do is basically go inside of the pie, and if we put a render function here, and we're going to receive this thing called a pie, and we'll just do an arrow function that returns something. We can basically go a bit low level into the SVG itself and start rendering G tags, which is a group in SVG, and path, which is just basically a line or a shape. So what we're going to do is we're going to pie. It has something called the arcs, so that would be basically each piece of the pie for our 3 coins, and we're going to map those out. So this would receive an arc, an arrow function, and then in here we're going to return a G. So we'll do G like this, and our G, we probably don't need this because inside of the G we're just going to put one thing, but it's our group and we need to give it a key because we're mapping. So what is arc to begin with? We're probably going to get an error, but let's just console.log the arc so we can see what we're dealing with here. So you see we've lost the pie chart again. That's fine, we'll get it back. But each of these, each arc basically contains the data, so that would be sort of each element inside of our coins array. So we can use that to get the color, for example. We could use the symbol as the key for this G tag that we're rendering out. We get the end angle, an index, the pad angle, a value. So I think start angle and end angle. So I mean, what do we do with these, right? It's a little bit confusing, but don't worry, there's a function that comes with this pie object here that will help us calculate how to draw out that shape. So we're going to give it a key. So our key will be arc.data dot, and they've obviously used TypeScript because it knows sort of what all of the different attributes are of my data. So we're going to use the symbol as the key. And what we're then going to do is draw a path inside of this. So we can just do a path like this. And path, we need to send it at least one thing. So D is basically what path are you going to draw in SVG. And I mean, how in the world do we calculate this? Don't worry, we don't have to. We can call pi.path and we can pass in the arc. And by doing this, we probably don't need this console.log anymore, so let's get rid of it. We now have basically what we were rendering out before. So I mean, why do we go to all this value? Well, now we get access to the actual G and the path elements. So we can come in here and add a fill property, and fill will be arc.data.color. So by doing that, we are now rendering out a colorful pie chart. So it's starting to look a little bit more like that one I demoed from the Exodus wallet. It's obviously, it's not growing when we hover on it yet, but that's the next thing we're going to do. So how do we know which one I'm hovering over. So we're in React, so why don't we store it in state? So I've already imported useState. So we're going to come here and we are going to store the active, basically whatever you're highlighting. So set active. It's going to be useState, and there'll be nothing sort of at the beginning. There's nothing active. And how can we track which one you're hovering? Well, we can use two basically events, and that would be on mouse enter. So when on mouse enter happens, we are going to set active to be the arc.data, which basically represents whatever coin that we're hovering over. So let me just save this to get prettier putting it out. And when we do on mouse leave, we can set active back to null. So why don't we just sort of console.log whatever active is so we can make sure that it's working correctly. I use console.log for debugging, as you can tell. So we hover it, hover out, hover over Solana out. So it seems to be working as expected. Let me get rid of this console.log. And what we can do is basically play with this inner radius prop and change the value if the arc that's being rendered is the active one. We'll make it a little bit fatter. So what you can do is, instead of sort of just passing in a hard-coded value here, you can receive the arc, and instead of putting arc here, we can actually just get access to the data of that arc. And then what we're going to do is we are going to do a little bit of a calculation. So we're going to say return half minus, and then we're going to put a ternary in here to basically figure out what the size of our radius should be. So why don't we put that in a variable actually? So we'll say size is equal to, if there's active and the active symbol is equal to the data symbol. If that's true, let's say we'll make it 12, otherwise we'll make it 8. So then we'll return half minus the size, like this. So now when I hover over, if I did it right, it sort of grows that piece of the pie. So it's starting to come together. Next up, we're going to add the text in the middle. So remember, we're dealing with SVG here, and visx comes with this text element, text component that will render out sort of SVG text quite easily, which is great because it's a bit of a pain otherwise. And it also centers it nicely, which is cool to work with. So why don't we come and let's just go below our pie, and we're going to use some text, and we can just say, hey, so there it is showing up here in the middle. Is it an SVG text? Let me check. Maybe I'm lying. Yes, it is. It's SVG text, which has this inside. Okay, so it's a little bit off center, and we can solve that by basically saying text anchor is middle. And we can also set the color of it by setting the fill. So we'll make this one triple Fs for white. So now we got hey showing up in the middle. And what we wanted to display is basically the total value of our entire wallet. So we're going to do a calculation and basically summarize all of these values in US dollars. So to do that, what we're going to do is inside of here, we can put this $sign here and then render in this value here. We're going to use our friend reduce to basically iterate over all of the coins and calculate what their total value is. So we'll say coins.reduce. Okay, and then we have our arrow function, which will return a value. Let's just say 5 for now. Its initial value is going to be 0. So if we were to just do this, let's see what's happening. So $, comma, I don't know where the heck this is coming from. I have an idea though, and I know how to get rid of it at least. And then we've got this number 5. Okay, so let's first just calculate this properly, and then we'll get rid of the comma. So what we receive in each one of these is the accumulated value and then the coin. And so then what we're going to do is we're going to say the accumulated value plus the coin.amount times the coin.inUSD value. Come back, so we have $670.815. Let's say we don't want cents, we just want dollar amounts. So what we could do is wrap this in a math.floor to basically just round down to the nearest integer. Cool, so we have 670 bucks, comma, what the heck. So I think what they're doing is they're basically receiving the children and then they're joining their text values together on comma. At least that's in my mind what's happening. So an easy way to solve this is just, let's put this whole thing as a string like this, and then we'll embed inside of this string this value. So then we can put the $sign in here instead. And it looks a little bit ugly, but there we go, 670. So next thing we need to do is just change the size. So there's font size, we'll set it to 40. Make this really big. And then we want to put another text below that just says how many assets we have. So why don't we just copy and paste to save us a little bit of work. And then inside of here, we want it to basically say the number of assets. So that would be coins.length assets. And again, we do it in this backtick string so that it doesn't add a comma in between the two words. Disaster. So there's an offset where you can basically bring one up a few pixels and the other one down a few pixels. And that is a prop called dy. So we're going to bring this one up 20 pixels, so minus 20 pixels up, and then this one dy will just bring 20 pixels down. And there we go. So we have it showing up correctly. I did want to make the bottom one a little bit smaller, so let's just make it 20, and we'll change the color to AAA. And there we go. So it's looking pretty close to Exodus Wallet, but what Exodus does is when you hover sort of one of these shapes of the pie, it changes the text in the middle to show you sort of what you're hovering. So that's the next thing we need to do, and actually the last thing. So what we're going to do is basically add a ternary here. So we're going to say if there's an active, do one thing, and then what do we want to do? I don't know. For now, we'll just put a span that says, hey. Otherwise, we're going to render this here. But because there's two children, you can't just throw them in. We need to put them in a fragment. So let's put our fragment, paste the text, and then hover. Oh, you can't put a span in here because we're dealing with SVG. But see, it disappears when we have an active. That's okay. So what we're going to do is scrap this span and just copy and paste this whole fragment in. And then what we want to do is basically on the top one, just show the amount of this coin. So instead of doing this whole reduce business, we can simplify it by just saying we want to times the active amount by active.inUSD. So there we go. So that's the amount just for the one I'm active. And then we need to change assets to just say how many coins in sort of that currency are there. So whatever, 400 ADA, 5 Sol, 0 point something something BTC. So we can come down here and we can put in here how many coins there are. So this would just be active.amount. And then instead of assets, what we could do is we could embed the active.symbol. So there we go, 200 ADA, 5 Sol, 0.005 BTC. But why don't we just make it the color of the thing that's being highlighted. So that's pretty easy to do. We'll just come up here and say active.color. Come back, 200 ADA, 5 sol, 0.005 BTC. And we've basically rebuilt the Exodus pie chart as close as possible in visx. So the one thing we're missing are the really nice animations or transitions that the Exodus wallet has. visx, in their examples, which are pretty extensive, they show you some examples of how to animate. They've got a really cool gallery where they sort of show you the power of this package. So one that I use quite a bit is the pie, and they give you an example of how they built this pie chart, and see how it's animating. So animations are definitely possible, but it's a whole bunch of code to make that happen. So I didn't think I had it in my brain to memorize how to do this for this video. So I would say go look at the example, and what they use for the animations is actually the React Spring package, and they're sort of animating on the values, the raw values that they're receiving from the pie chart. But the cool thing is they tell you what packages to import here at the top, and then they give you this code sample. They tell you how to try it on Code Sandbox, and they do it as TypeScript, which is really nice as well. So check out the gallery. And docs, how docs works is you may be looking for a pie chart here and you won't find it, and that's because pie is part of shape. So you would first click into shape and then sort of scroll down here, and they have all the different shapes you can work with. And then here you can see pie, what are the different props it receives and their data type, and an explanation of what it does. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video, how to build a pretty cool looking interactive pie chart using visx. Take care. Bye.